Imagine a government agency. It's funded by your tax dollars, staffed by professionals, and its whole job is to protect children, the most vulnerable children.
Ones with nowhere else to go.
Right. Now imagine that agency has a policy. And I don't mean a policy of just, being careless or looking the other way.
No, this is much more than negligence. We're talking about a proactive, deliberate strategy.
Exactly. A policy to place these kids intentionally into the homes of men they knew were sexual predators. Not by accident. They thought it was a good idea.
It sounds like fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like some dark conspiracy theory you'd find online. But it's not.
It is a documented historical fact. It happened in West Berlin, in the heart of Europe. And it wasn't a brief mistake. It went on for nearly 30 years.
It's one of the most deeply disturbing chapters in the history of child welfare, really.
Yeah.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into what's known as the Kentler Experiment.
And we have a lot to get through. We're pulling from recent investigations into the Berlin Senate, the huge University of Hildesheim research project that finally blew this wide open, and some pretty dense academic work on how institutions become structurally abusive.
And looking at this material, it's heavy stuff.
It is. It really challenges everything you think you know about how the systems designed to protect people operate.
It does. But our mission here isn't just to be shocked. We really need to understand the mechanics of it. How a so-called scientific theory allowed the state to basically fund and organize the abuse of children.
Under the guise of foster care. So let's get into it. To understand this, we have to go back in time. We're in West Berlin, late 1960s, early 70s.
And you have to remember what West Berlin was like then. It was an island surrounded by East Germany. It was a magnet for counterculture, for new ideas, for people who wanted to experiment.
So there was this intense intellectual mood of questioning everything. The family, authority, how we raise kids. It was all up for debate.
Exactly. The whole mood was anti-authoritarian. And in the middle of all this, you have a man named Helmut Kentler.
Okay, so we need to be really clear about who this guy was, because he wasn't some fringe weirdo.
Not at all.
Huh.
He was a superstar in his field, a professor of social pedagogy. He was a department head at the Max Planck Institute. That is as prestigious as it gets in German academia.
He was literally writing the textbooks. He was the expert witness for the courts. When Kentler talked, people listened.
And that authority is absolutely key to this whole story. His focus was on difficult boys, runaways, delinquents, kids the system had given up on.
The kids nobody else wanted, and Kentler shows up and says, I've got a solution.
But his solution wasn't more therapy or better group homes. He had this theory he called emancipatory education. And he argued that these boys who were starved of affection would benefit from being placed with single, adult men.
And not just any men. He specifically sought out men who were openly sexually attracted to children.
Yes. And this is where the pseudoscience is just. It's staggering. He didn't call it abuse. He called it a therapeutic relationship. His logic was that a pedophile's sexual desire would guarantee that the man wouldn't abandon the boy.
I had to stop reading the report at that point. His rationale was that the sexual attraction was the glue that a normal foster parent might give up, but a pedophile would stick around because he was getting something out of it.
That's it, exactly. He called it a symbiosis, that the man's sexual needs and the boy's need for a home would balance out into this caring environment.
It's a transaction. The child pays for a roof over their head with their body.
That is the brutal truth of it. But he dressed it all up in academic jargon. Eros in education. He made it sound progressive, revolutionary. And because he was Professor Helmut Kentler, the authorities in Berlin, they bought it.
And that's the jump, isn't it? From one man's twisted theory to the Berlin Youth Welfare Office saying, yes, let's make this official policy.
Which brings us to the role of the state, because this is where it becomes a systemic crime. The Berlin Senate didn't just look the other way, they operationalized it.
The Hildesheim research is absolutely damning on this. This wasn't a case of officials being duped. They knew. Social workers knew exactly who these men were.
In some cases, the men had criminal records for sexual offenses against children. I mean, that would normally be an immediate, absolute disqualification from being a foster parent.
But here, under Kentler's experiment, a criminal record was almost like a qualification.
In a way, yes. Because in his theory, that specific desire was the point. The officials basically just waived the rules. They look at a convicted sex offender and said, perfect. You're just who we need for this trouble boy.
And the money. We have to talk about the money. The state wasn't just handing over kids.
They were handing over checks. These men received official foster care payments. Taxpayer money.
which creates this horrific incentive. You're giving predators access to victims and you're paying them a salary for it. And for the state, it was cheaper, wasn't it? Cheaper than an institution.
That is a very cynical but probably very real part of the calculation. Institutional care is expensive. This was cheap. So you had the state wanting a budget solution, Kentler wanting to prove his theory, and the predators wanting access.
The perfect storm. And this was a whole network, right? Kentler himself was often vetting and approving the foster fathers.
He was the broker. He knew these men, and he used his official position to bring them into the state system and legitimize them.
So you have the theory, the bureaucracy, the money, and then you have what it was actually like for the boys in those homes.
And it was a nightmare. The testimonies are just heartbreaking. The loving symbiosis was, of course, a complete myth. These were places of constant sexual abuse, daily abuse.
The research highlights one case in particular of a foster father who took in multiple boys, one after the other, for years.
Yes, and that case shows the complete failure of oversight. The Youth Welfare Office knew. Social workers were visiting the home, doing supervision visits.
What does supervision even mean in that context? If the whole premise is that this man is sexually attracted to the child, what are you even checking for?
Well, that's the core of the problem. The baseline for what was acceptable was gone. They were looking at abuse through Kentler's lens and seeing it as relationship building.
The state basically legalized abuse within the four walls of those homes. They drew a line and said, the law doesn't apply here. This is science.
And they thought they were being progressive. You have to remember, this was the 70s. The idea was that protecting children from sexuality was repressive. So these social workers thought they were liberating children.
But they were enabling their enslavement. And this didn't just end when the 70s did. The report shows this continued into the 1990s, with some of these placements lasting until the early 2000s.
That timeline is just shocking. We're talking about an era when we had a much clearer understanding of child abuse. But the network persisted.
How? How did it last so long?
Institutions protect themselves. And Kentler was still an influential figure. Admitting this was a catastrophic failure would have meant admitting to a massive state crime.
So the cover-up starts. The researchers from Hildesheim mentioned how many files were just gone.
Missing or destroyed.
Yeah.
It's a phrase you hear way too often in these kinds of investigations. Personal files of the foster children, shredded or just vanished.
Which strongly suggests that at some point, someone knew how bad this looked and decided to erase the evidence.
It seems very likely, and it means we'll never know the true number of victims. The ones we know about are just the tip of the iceberg.
And for those victims, getting any kind of justice has been nearly impossible.
Incredibly difficult. Besides the trauma, you have the German legal system. The statute of limitations for most of these crimes has long since expired.
So the state can admit, yes, we facilitated your abuse, but then say, sorry, it was too long ago to prosecute anyone.
Essentially, yes. And since the state was often the legal guardian, they would have had to sue themselves, which of course never happened.
The Berlin authorities have apologized now, though, right? They've called it a structural failure.
They have. There's been shock, shame, and some compensation schemes have been set up. But as the survivors say, money doesn't undo the damage of being told your abuse was a form of therapy.
That phrase, structural failure, keeps coming up. The researchers really emphasize that this wasn't just a few bad actors.
Right. It means you can't just blame Kentler. You have to blame the university system that gave him a platform without evidence. You have to blame the welfare bureaucracy that chose a cheap, easy theory over child safety.
It's the whole structure. It's built to defer to experts. If the famous professor says it's okay, the social worker isn't going to question it.
That is authority bias in action. And it's a huge warning, because that structure still exists today.
Why?
We still have bureaucracies, we still have budget cuts, and we still have charismatic experts driving policy.
Which connects to that warning in the report, that this pattern just repeats itself under new names.
Exactly. The Kentler experiment is over. But the mechanism that allowed it to happen is not. We're always running social experiments on vulnerable people in foster care, education, elder care.
It really makes you wonder, what are we doing right now that people in 30 years will look back on with the same horror?
That's the question, isn't it? The people running this in the 70s didn't think they were villains. They thought they were pioneers. So we have to ask ourselves, where are our blind spots today?
It just demands that we insist on real evidence, hard evidence, not just a compelling theory from a famous academic.
And that we always, always put the safety of the individual over the convenience of the system.
The victims of this experiment paid the price for a theory that had zero basis in reality.
They did. And the fact that the state paid for it with our money is a stain that doesn't just go away.
You know, usually we try to find some kind of lesson learned that wraps things up neatly, but with this one, the lesson just feels like a warning.
The lesson is vigilance. It's skepticism. And it's remembering that just because a policy is legal or approved by experts, that doesn't make it right.
That's the takeaway. The gap between what is legal and what is moral can be an abyss. And for 30 years in West Berlin, children were pushed into it.
And we owe it to them to never forget that and to make sure we don't let the next expert talk us into another catastrophe.
Absolutely. This was a tough one, but a necessary deep dive.
Agreed.
So I want to leave you with that thought. Look at the policies being tested in your communities, in your schools. Who are the experts driving them? And who pays the price if they turn out to be wrong?
Stay curious and stay critical.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.